Hi, my name is Wayne, and this is Type Tested. I don't know how this particular video is going to work out, but we're going to give it a try. So what I have here today is a case from a Smith Corona 5TE electric series. Now, when I got it, the handle here was broken off of the case. Now you can see that what's supposed to happen is this is supposed to fit on like that, and the little cone here holds it inside the handle hardware. Now, this was broken off. Of course, I just dropped it. Oh, sorry. And I was lucky in that when I took the handle off, I was able to find this trapped inside. Otherwise, I would have been forced to try to figure out how to mold a new one. So this, unlike most of the Smith Corona cases, is just held on with screws. So you can see that here, sort of. So it's just your normal flat blade screw. So that made it easy to extract the hardware. In a lot of cases, these are held on by rivets. And in that case, unless you're willing to redo the rivet, you're out of luck. So being able to extract that gave me a lot more freedom. What I've decided to do here is I've taken, this is a little 16th inch drill bit. I've taken a little 1/16 brad, just the same kind of that you'd use to hang a picture on a wall. And I have proceeded to mangle it to death with a pair of vice grips in order to give it a nice rough surface in which to grab. Then what I've done is I took a drill bit. Now, because of the way this is, I don't have an angle to actually use power, so I was forced to simply use my fingers to turn this and put a little bit of pressure on it. Not much, just enough to get it to dig in and be able to pull out little bits of plastic. Now, this brad was a little bit longer than I'm going to need, so what I did is I cut the point off on it here. But I left the fat head, and that's important. So this, I'm going to put down inside. I'm going to melt it in, and then I'm going to glue this on top with some epoxy. Now I have to get it to go in about 1/4 inch, and that shouldn't be hard. And if I can't get it to go quite far enough, I can sacrifice the head. But the point is, by making the rough surfaces, I make lots of places for it to grip. So it becomes very hard for it to pull out on its own. And by having the head, when this is full of epoxy, that too is going to make it harder to pull through the epoxy as long as it grabs on the surface of the this cut off piece here. Now, I made this hole larger than the other one because I need to have some room to maneuver. It's very difficult to get the two holes to line up exactly. And this, if I don't have it turned around the right direction, well, the cone is going to be pointing off to one side or another. So this is kind of a critical surface. So I need to be able to move it around once I get the epoxy in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pliers here, and I am going to heat up this nail, and I'm going to set it in place. So give me just a moment, start the torch. There we go. Now I don't need to get it red hot. I just need to get it hot enough to melt plastic. That ought to do. Turn that off. And set this in place and shove it down a fair amount if I can. And part of the reason for making the hole is because when I melt the plastic in, the plastic that's going to be displaced has to have somewhere to go. If it doesn't, then you'll risk actually fracturing the piece. So that went in. It went in basically as much as I wanted it to. So now, what I need to do mix up a little bit of epoxy. So I've got this here. It's just a little bit of JB Weld, nothing special. I don't need a lot of it. And let's take one of these brads and use it as a stir, for lack of anything more appropriate. Mix it up until it's a nice solid gray. And I was fortunate in that this broke with a nice clean break. So it's going to go back together very nicely. So I'm going to put a little bit of this in the hole there. Going to put this on top of that. Press it in and try to get this to about the angle it's supposed to be. And it looks like I need a little bit more. And of course, one of my lights just went out. Let's put some epoxy around the base here. So they don't come up shy. A little more deep in that hole. I want to make sure there are no voids. And extra epoxy can be cleaned off. So now, all that's necessary is for me to put a little bit of pressure on that, let it sit in place for 24 hours, trim up the end, then I can put it back on the case. And I'll show you that here in just a minute. Okay, now that 24 hours have passed, here is my finished part. This is the end that had to be reconnected. I've done a little bit of scraping with a sharp pocket knife to get some of the loose epoxy off and to shape it the way it's supposed to. And it looks pretty good. Now, it's not quite fully cured yet. It'll take a little bit longer, so I can't actually put the weight of the typewriter on it, but I can still mount it. So that is going to go like this. So it'll sit this way and pivot up and down appropriately. Now, if you look, you can see it's not entirely perfect, but it will definitely do the job. And the weight, the strain is right at this point. So even if this is a little weak, that brad that I put in there is really going to make a difference in its overall strength. So once again, this fits just with screws. So I've got the bottom ones in place here. The top ones have a washer attached to them, which you're going to have to put in place. And I'll do that just here. And these screws are a little longer than the lower screws. Get in there. There we go. So, hold the handle here and start threading the first screw that you can really get to sit. It looks like it'll be this one here. And before I go too further, I want to get them all set so they don't fall out while I'm working. Now for the upper ones. Just pull this here. not exactly the right screwdriver, but it'll do the job. So when working with a flat blade screwdriver, it's much more important to cover the width of the slot than it is the length of it. This is a little bit too narrow, but that's a precision screwdriver. Okay, now that that's in place, let's quickly test it, see if it works. Get the other half of the case. And of course, this is designed to come off. So snap it back in where it belongs. Close it up. Examine the latch, make sure it latches fully. And there we have it. A nice repaired Smith Corona 5TE case. Once again, my name is Wayne, and this has been another episode of Type Tested.